Optics EQ. I'm a partner in Optics EQ, which is a past performance provider. As far as the information, a lot of it is just really the standard information that you're going to see in the past performances that you have in front of you, as far as like when the horse raced, where they raced, all the stuff that's pretty standard. We're just putting it in a different format. So I'll use, we call optics plot and then optics grid with the past 3 run lines. And so what optics plot is showing is a visual representation of the race shape. So it'll be the horses in the field, how they relate towards each other. And as far as I'll kind of go through sort of different ways as far as first call, second call, finishing ability, standard being current form, surface distance, pretty self-explanatory, today's surface distance of the race. And then with the past 3 run lines, again, this will kind of look like what's in your program when you're looking at the standard running lines, where the horse, when they race, or morning line, when they race, the surface, the distance they ran at, the track, the date, the condition of the race, the optics figure, so that's our own speed figure, finishing position. These 2 columns are unique to optics. This column here is an optics grade, which is somebody who's following the circuit and taking notes will assign a grade to that performance. And kind of working from like an ABC standpoint, a B, when you see a B, that's a winning race for the level. So the horse doesn't necessarily have to win in order to put forward a winning effort. Sometimes when you're watching a race, you'll say, oh, that horse was best, but they got in trouble and they finished. They can compete at that level and put it a winning effort. They'd still earn a B. A B plus would mean they run that race multiple times, that horse is going to win, is just better, did an above and beyond performance for the level. That can often indicate a step up in class. If you see like a B plus from allowance company, then they go into graded stakes. Sometimes those type of horses can make that transition. B minus, not quite a winning effort. C plus, pretty average. Maybe you're underneath spot. C showed no running at any point. A's are really rare. I think there's maybe only a couple A's on the entire card. It's like exceptional performances, Flightline, American Pharaoh, things that like you rarely ever see. So we're pretty much working in that standpoint. And then as far as optics notes in this column, that it works kind of together and also separately as far as the grade. It's just a little bit more information about necessarily how that trip, how that finish, how that grade was earned. And some of what will be in the note will be information, right? The horse saved ground, the horse wore a nasal strip, things that just happened, right? Slog, the horse broke slow. These are things that have happened. And then there's kind of the projection side. We're looking at this horse, you might see turf ? So we'd expect that horse to move up on the turf. Or shorter, this horse is going to improve with a cut back in distance. Or when you see those shorters and they're stretching out in a distance, the horse can't handle it. So those types of projections. And essentially with notes, when you're taking notes in general and watching races, is you're always kind of looking of that race or that horse run. Next out, is the horse going to improve, regress, or stay the same, right? And so that's what we're going to get into a lot with handicapping these races, and where we can try to find value is because, we'll start with a horse that Forte, once we get there. Has everybody looked at the races for somewhat? So if I say Forte, that's not a name that we're unfamiliar. Okay, all right. It's going to come into the race as the most accomplished, right? And so what we're going to have to decide is, are there other horses that are now on his level, or has he just kind of asserted himself as the best horse of that crop and everybody else is below? Those are things that we can start to use projections to improve on. So I'll get started. If I know there's still a few people that are like signed up that aren't here, and if they trickle in or whatever, we'll just kind of go through. But starting with the Kentucky Oaks race, and again, we'll kind of look at the plot, because I think another thing with optics is we really kind of base the handicapping principles on sort of those 4 main principles, right? Pace, class, speed, and form. Is this horse in the position with their running style to get the right trip? Are they in the right class level, right? Are they for the Oaks, is this a grade 1 type horse? Speed, are they fast enough to compete? Not necessarily do they have to be the fastest, but does their form suggest that they're fast enough to compete with this field? And then in terms of form, are they coming into this race the right way to run that top effort? So that's pretty much what we're looking at with optics. And when you're handicapping in general, and it gets tricky with these races because, you know, for the Oaks, for the Derby, and even a lot of these stakes races, you have horses coming from all over. And so you're trying to find out where these horses kind of match up with each other as far as form with those races. So we'll start with optics plot, which is going to give the pace scenario, right? A visual representation of the race. And this isn't a predictive model. That's why I'm careful to say that we're not gonna look at the plot and say the plot likes 22. There's no 22 in the race. I just made that up, so we weren't confused. But you know, we're looking at certain trips, and then we'll go through the running lines. Frost, you've been doing good. What's going on? So one of the things that, like, when I'm handicapping a race in general, or playing a race in general, is my process will start with the favorite. Start with either if I'm using the morning line favorite or the betting favorite. Rhonda's gonna flatter him and give him attention. So the favorite in this race is Wet Paint, who's a 7. So when we're looking at the plot, what the plot is telling me is we've got a horse that's a deep closer, right? Way in the back. The plot, the first call reads left to right. Second call, I'm going to do like a simple understanding here. Second call will kind of be top down. Going to the stretch drive, they'd be kind of going on a diagonal towards the top left-hand corner. As far as the circles and squares, they indicate finishing ability. Circles have less finish, squares have more finish. The bigger the circle, the less finish. The bigger the square, the more finish. Okay. So as we can see on Wet Paint, deep closer. This is a full field. There's a couple also eligibles in there. 15, 16, 17 are horses in there that haven't drawn in. But even with those horses, they're kind of in the middle of the plot. Wet Paint is still going to have to pass 13 other runners in order to get to the wire first. Which is, you know, with closers is always tough, right? Which is one of those reasons that made Zenyatta part of what she is. But I think that's something that, as Wet Paint, can be a hurdle for the favorite, right? And a lot of people are going to be using her as the favorite because she's coming in off the three most recent wins, and in terms of speed figures, kind of has that resume built in. We can kind of see that when we look at the past three running lines, how she has these 3 1s coming into the race. Speed figure wise, the optics figure range for this race, it's going to take somewhere between a 90 and 96. Typically, it's going to be on the higher end of the optics figure range. So speed figure wise, she does have a 96 in her most recent start, but that was a top effort that day, top speed figure of that form cycle. Here, I'll let you free. How about that? Of that form cycle, and it was coming where she has a tendency to break slow and kind of a weaker race last out. So those are things to kind of keep in mind. Looking at her past performances, she was improving with each start, but again, did run that top effort last out. Is going to have to transfer it into this tougher test, into this tougher field, where she is going to still require a top effort and require that trip from off the pace. So in terms of like assessing the favorite, she is fast enough to win this race. She has the B races that are in graded stakes company. In terms of trip, the pace does not look like it's overly contentious or expects to be overly fast. So it's not necessarily a scenario that sets up strongly for a closer, not impossible. it's a scenario where she is going to have to be much the best in order to kind of overcome that trip in today's race shape. She's had a couple favorable trips, and then again that weaker race in that most recent start, which was her top speed figure today. When everyone was handicapping this race, did you come across Wet Paint as the horse to beat in this race? Ryan, you did? You had her as a toss?
Well, no, I mean, I want to beat her. She's going to be a little first.
Admittedly, you've been around it. You guys go through this thing.
Yeah.
And Wet Paint keeps coming up.
That's true.
I remembered it, so I was like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah. Yeah, we had you got it? Okay. Yeah, she was one that we used in the pick 3 that day. But we also used a few others because I think part of that reason of being a short price and being a closer, it does leave some space to some other horses in the field. So we can kind of work from a standpoint of sort of working kind of outward as far as morning line. Botanical being the second choice. Now she's not plotted on surface distance because she's been running on synthetic turf previously, but on surface distance, she has positional speed to the first call. She has some finishing ability as a square, but not necessarily the second call, and is going to be pressured by some other runners in the field with number 10, Flying Connection, number 12, Darth Vader, 2 horses that don't have finishing ability but are likely to keep that pace hot. Sitting kind of in that second flight, 17 is out, 13, Affirmative Lady, another one that has some speed, not necessarily finishing ability. You can see on that plot a little bit better. Where are we at now? 2, The Alley's Look is a longer shot in this race. 8, Promiser America, another longer shot in this race. But if you're kind of looking at the plot and you're between 6 and 8, you can kind of make a case for the 8 and the 6. One being 30-1, one being 4-1. Some of the more contenders getting into this is the 11. Defining Purpose, kind of sits well on the plot, has kind of positional speed, you can see in the middle, has the positional speed, finishing ability in there. As far as number 5, Wonder Wheel, she's the one that's covered up right now. But I think as a horse, so we'll talk about her real quick. She is a multiple graded stakes winner, has 2 grade 1 wins, the Alcibiades and the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies, has been able to show versatility. She is able to win on the lead. She can also pass horses. As far as speed figures, she was on a progressive speed figure pattern up until that most recent race at Keeneland, the grade 1 Ashland. Now that race is interesting because you can, I guess you can't see on optics notes. You're just going to have to take my word for it because that line is in there. But it says traffic wide improve. And the extended comment of that race just says that the timing and the trip was completely off. So when we're looking at those kind of standard past performances, you'll kind of see running lines of a horse that won her first 2 starts, finished second by just a length in grade 1 company in the spin away. When those next 2 races came back with another second place finish, a tough loss coming off the layoff, making a move at Tampa, and then that most recent running line, which could have her overlooked at a price, but excusing that line kind of from the optics note where it says she had traffic, she was wide and wasn't the right ride, projects to improve. She gets back to those other races. She could be a contender in this race. Gambling Girl, the number 3, is another horse that has some positional speed and finishing ability. She's looking from the plot position, one that's capable of getting a first run, the number 3 horse there, first run on Wet Paint, kind of that same type of running style. A horse that hasn't necessarily been overly fast, but again has optics figures that are in range, recording in 94 in her most recent start, and then going back to the Demoiselle, where she had a B optics grade that day and recorded in 91. Again, not a horse that in terms of being like a super strong contender, but when you're trying to take on a favorite, you know, you're just kind of looking for some advantages, which it could be pace, it could be form, for a horse that is fast enough. couple other horses in here that are worth a mention. Now, 14 is a horse that we need to talk about 4 and 14. I'll talk about 4 first. South Lawn. Yeah. Now this is a horse that a lot of people are interested in. I see a lot of thumbs up. A lot of you like South Lawn. What do you like about South Lawn?
I like that second to last race on the track when
The back on February 17th in the allowance. Yeah. That was a very good race. She did have a favorable trip that day, got a really great ride, and it is worth kind of noting, this is something I picked up recently, that she actually had throat surgery right before that race. So there's that layoff line after the grass race at Churchill. I don't know, but it makes her run a little bit better than she had in the past. But her prior 2 races at Churchill Downs, now we are kind of keeping that in mind that she is improving, but her 2 races before that at Churchill Downs were softer speed figures. Now she did, according to my visuals off that race, where she did win by 8 lengths, and that it was a favorable trip. I projected that she would regress off that effort. You can see that right there. She did earn a 96 optics figure that day. And then even though she won in that next start at the Fairground Oaks, she did regress a little bit to a 92. So as far as that pattern, I'm a little bit concerned that, like, holding her form, that she hasn't kind of peaked in her form cycle and then is going to take a step back, and she does have to transfer her form. Again, has had some favorable trips. And if I'm looking, at Optics Plot, as far as standard, she is a big circle, but on surface distance, she's kind of covered up. She's covered up by the 11 a little bit, but is a square in quadrant 1 on surface distance. So there are some things to like. I don't imagine the 8-1 is going to stick. I feel like I think she's going to be second choice in here. I would imagine. It kind of seems like there's a lot of buzz in here on her. Was there anybody else that, Ryan, you like South on too?
I think so. I think the throat surgery goes pretty good, because if you look at her previous run races before that, now look like she's got a lot more energy, a lot more close.
Yeah, no, it definitely did improve. If she was able to run back to those efforts, she could certainly compete. And she has more tactical speed, obviously, than the favorite looking for alternatives. So, hard to knock from that perspective. Defining Purpose, another one that's a little bit interesting. Again, she kind of has that same plot in the middle. One that when she was out at Oakland Park, she did get beat on the square by our favorite Wet Paint a couple times in those races. Now, one of those races was a grade 3 Honeybee, and she finished 6th in that race. And you can see on the optics note there that it says Trouble S+ and then move. She actually stumbled inside the gate. So typically when you see a horse stumble out of the gate, like the doors open and then they take a step and then they lose their footing, she lost her footing inside the stall. And that played a role in that race. And then obviously she came back from that race, got a perfect trip, recorded in 96. So another one that was on kind of an improving pattern, but does kind of have to hold her form coming into this race. But if you are looking at those past performances and you see that that's that one race where she finishes off the board, you can note that there was an excuse in there. That is a little bit tougher to see as far as the trip. There's another horse in here I thought was a little bit interesting. Can the 10 wire? I suppose. I think she's coming out. She is a little bit on the cheaper side. She's coming off a big, strong speed figure out at Sunland. Prior to that, her other numbers don't make her a fit at all. So that seemed like a top effort that day. She has been given the 40 days rest. Does look like she's going to take a little bit more pace pressure in here than that race, but I think she is likely to be forwardly placed, one that maybe, depending on the track profile, again, depending on the price and like your comfort level of how much you want to step out as far as that. And also, number one, Mimi Kakushi is one that we can't plot. She's coming in from overseas, but has shown speed in her races. And with the rail draw, maybe there's a scenario where she shows more speed. And again, that's not going to be reflected on the plot. It's really hard to tell. I think that the draw kind of forces their hand a little bit in terms of trip. Now, another one on the plot that doesn't look, a couple others on the plot that doesn't look all that great, since we're starting with South Lawn, coming back from the Fairgrounds Oaks. Pretty Mischievous was making her second start of the form cycle and ran a top effort back on February 18th. Speed figure wise, where are we? Oh no, she ran, thank you, Brian. She ran a 94 in that race. I don't know why it's timing out so quick. Ran a 94, and that was coming off a layup. So she might have regressed a little bit after this race. She made a favorable impression. She had some trouble at the start, did lack a finish. There could be some regression. She could be sitting on a top, and they are going to add blinkers today. So that might be just kind of something worth keeping in mind as far as if there is a move forward. I started to kind of, after a while, come around to And Tell Me No Lies, trying to get a little bit creative as far as horses outside of wet paint. And part of that reason was And Tell Me No Lies is another horse that has 2 graded stakes wins as a juvenile, was running faster speed figures than as a juvenile, and coming back this season, she's in her 3rd start of the form cycle. She's running in races in compact fields out in California, those 5-horse fields, Peter Miller being a little bit cold, and running behind a horse that would probably be a shorter price in here, the Baffert runner, Fiza, who's probably going to run out at Pimlico. So being a little bit against the race shape in those events, has some back numbers, and might just find herself in the right field here because she has that back form, has those speed figures to run back to, and keeping in mind the cold barn, the compact field. So even though she doesn't look great on the plot, there are some things to like as far as her form. Be reasonable. Be reasonable.
What about the 14?
Yeah, the 14 is the Pretty Mischievous. That was the one that was on the form cycle pattern that won 2 back. Comes out of the Fairgrounds Oaks. Possible some regression in there. She always makes a very positive impression on the track. But again, I think she has a look cycling back. She could be sitting on a new top in the 3rd start of the form cycle. I know there's a few that I didn't go kind of into detail on, but I think we kind of hit. 16 is on the also eligible list. Julia Shining. She would be an upgrade should she draw in. But she's gonna need a little bit of luck. Tax being the 15 seems out of it. She's a circle down in quadrant 3. Doesn't have enough early speed, doesn't have enough second call speed, and doesn't have finishing ability. But 16, as you can see on the plot, would be a strong contender should she draw in. Was there any questions, any horses that we want to go over? And I can kind of talk about sort of my approach in here, how I'm going to kind of approach this race.
What are the reins?
I mean, I don't really have any issue. I really wouldn't upgrade or downgrade any horse in this field based on the weather. I possibly running styles, trends, like, certain riders are doing very well today or figuring out where. I would be looking at that more, but as individuals, I don't think there's any horse in here that I would like strongly upgrade or strongly downgrade on that type of position, running style. Yeah, my approach for this race, I'm not sure exactly like how I'd play exotics yet, so I'm not going to necessarily go, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd again, because things could change if like the 16 draws in, or let's say like the 10 scratches, which would change like the pace complexion and things like that. But as far as like pick 4s, pick 3s, all your multi-race, and then the doubles going into the next. I'm personally not going to be using wet paint on any of my tickets. I think there's other alternatives in this field. I think she's going to have a lot to overcome as far as trip, and also in terms of still having to prove that she's kind of the best horse in this race, where it looks pretty evenly matched. So the horses that I'm gonna use are definitely the 14, the 16 we talked about, 11 because she looks favorable in terms of trip, 9 because I expect that horse to just be a big price, and 5 definitely. 5 is probably going to be 5 and 9. As a horse that has those 2 graded stakes wins, has that 6th place finish, look right on top of the past performances, and is probably going to be overlooked in this race. South Lawn, I'm not necessarily against. I just project she's going to be a shorter price, and there could be some regression. But essentially, that's my main opinion is that I'm negative on wet paint as far as a win contender that I would be like keying a lot of tickets on. Any questions on the Oaks before we get into the easy one, the Kentucky Derby? Oh yeah. Yep. Let's go. Of course, yes.
I didn't even see him.
all of a sudden he's riding terrible for some reason, you might, you know, try to shift from the trends. Certain barns. I mean, that's kind of a talk about one in here. Yeah, one in here. I'll probably discuss as far as yeah. Yeah, like my handicapping process. Yeah, is pretty much based on the same as it's, you know, always pretty much class speed form. You know, watching every single race, knowing those horses, knowing like where they fit, and then the same process is always starting from the favorite, trying to find any holes in the favorite. If I go through it and I was like, this favorite's legit. It's the fastest horse in the race. It has the best running style. They're in form. They're in the right class level. This is a legitimate favorite. Now I'm going to try to beat the second choice. Hopefully I can do that because so I'm not going chalk. But yeah.
Some people might not know your notes are online. Might be a little box.
For the oak one or for the oak one, yeah. Well, we can talk to our marketing person about promoting it. But
We didn't hear that at this table.
oh, that it was.
I'm saying her notes online. Handicap football are pretty good. Just like she was saying today, a lot of people might not know it's online. Yeah. Find that box on the club office. Click on it.
Hi. You're just in time. We're about to do the Kentucky Derby. All right. So we'll start by this. I said it was easier, but look at this plot is correct. You know, the one obvious we'll see, right, is that there's no surface distance, right? We can't plot any data we don't have. And the fact that all these horses are running this distance for the first time, we don't have the surface distance. So when we're dealing with standard, we're dealing with current form, what that horse is in current form. So you'll have those horses that the two fills who's been on synthetic, you know, in that most recent start. Maybe we'll start there. But, you know, from those different racetracks, the one-turn miles, things like that are all kind of in the standard based on their current form. The one thing that, you know, as far as the pace of the Derby that people have talked about is, you know, who's going to be the pace setter? Where's the pace coming from? Is there going to be pace? Is the pace going to be hot? And the plot kind of has it almost in two different ways, right? Because if we're looking at contention, horses that want to be on or near the lead, that quadrant one, the box that's the top left, you can see that there are a number of horses that are in there, right? That want to be on or near the lead. Now, as far as how fast are they going to go, that's related to the speed rate up at the top, which is a lower speed rate. So even though you have, and we'll see this a lot when we're just talking pace in general, but you can have a lot of horses that want to be on or near the lead, but they don't necessarily have to be going very fast, right? They can all kind of be bunched up there, and then you look at the fractions, you're like, oh, they're going 23 and change. Oh, they went 48. And then the kind of the best of the speed of the horse that's sitting like in that pocket trip, you know, gets that kind of right first run, even though there's a lot of pace setters. There could be a different scenario where there's not necessarily a lot of horses that want to be on or near the lead, but that they end up going fast, and then it sets up for a horse. I'm trying to be proactive here. Sets up for a horse from off the pace. So with the plot, with that noted, that there should be we'll call it an honest pace, right? There should be enough horses that are up front. That doesn't really give any horse in this field a big advantage or disadvantage, right? So when we're talking about the Oaks and we're talking about Wet Pain and we're saying you have a confirmed closer, you have a early pace that's not necessarily, hey, stop it. It's not contentious. It's not going to be fast. That horse closing from off the pace could be at a disadvantage. In this scenario, when I look at this plot, I don't really see any horse that has a strong pace advantage or a strong pace disadvantage. Pretty much everybody on that aspect is fairly even. Now there's probably better horses than others. Should we should we go through horse by horse? Is that kind of the best way for the Derby? Okay, perfect. Okay, we'll start on the rail. Starting on the rail with Hit Show, a horse that for the most part, I mean, he really hasn't done anything wrong in any of his races to date. It's a question as far as I think a lot of people are looking at him as kind of more of a deeper closer too, and you can see on the plot he's kind of sitting more mid-pack. Now where that ends up being from the rail is gonna be a jockey decision by Franco. Maybe they think that they should be further back, and if they do take this horse further back off the pace as a circle, less finishing ability, he might not have the kick to close. Now in terms of value, the morning line is 30-1. I wouldn't expect it to be much shorter than that. Probably not much higher because of the rail, because people kind of, the rail losing last out. But it's a horse that in each start has been favored. So you are getting that big shift in odds. So initially a horse that I don't necessarily like as a horse, but one kind of based on value that I might end up using in as you talk about some of those deeper exotic spots, just kind of based on number and the fact that slow horses can run fourth, right? Like horses slow horses at big prices can run in those underneath spots, especially when they're kind of dismissed. So one I would kind of consider for that spot. Now verifying, you can see he's a circle in quadrant 1, so a horse that has positional speed, not necessarily much in terms of finishing ability. His win, going back to the races this season, now he did break his maiden on debut at Saratoga, got a lot of attention off that, but never really ran back to that number as a juvenile, running a 93 optics figure, ran an 82 next out, an 83. Then they came off the layoff. He ran a 99 in his return race, you can see with the perfect trip and allowance company, which is a solid speed figure, but he hasn't really, again, kind of got back to that top effort. And in those races where he did finish, where he did win, and he did finish second in the Bluegrass, had very favorable trips. So he's been able to get himself into favorable trips. Looking at the optics plot, not necessarily the most favorable trip, and doesn't really have the advantage like he did in the allowance 3 back, where he was kind of the best horse, and then he had the best trip in the Bluegrass and still didn't win. A horse that I think people are having a hard time figuring out what to do with. For me, it's pretty simple. I think he'll be shorter than the 15-1 morning line, not one that I'm personally interested in. Is there anybody here that was kind of interested a little bit based on
the speed, the number you ran in that Bluegrass?
He ran a 90. Okay, so we can talk about speed figures a little bit as we're talking about this race. So typically, the optics figure range for this race is a 96 to 102. In previous years, it's usually higher than what this year's is. So when we do the optics figure range, it's based on kind of previous conditions of race, and then that's also adjusted towards which horses are in this field. So this is basically saying this isn't the fastest group of 3-year-olds we've ever seen. So verifying does have that number.
Yeah, not so much for a win candidate.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, he's run the 99, he's run the 98. It's probably, again, kind of like the Oaks. It's going to probably take a number that's on the higher end of that optics figure range. So for verifying as a main contender, he's a horse that off those races, you'd have to be projecting that move forward. And given the fact that he's run those top efforts with favorable trips, that's hard for me, as somebody that does a lot of form cycle analysis, to say he's got to move forward, because if he's had perfect trips and that's as fast as he can go, I think we've seen where he is. 2 fills. I don't like this horse, so I'm just going to move on. I'm just kidding. I'm just going to see if this room is paying attention. No, I think this horse is legitimate. I guess by the reaction, I think that there's a few people in here that think so as well. It's an interesting optics plot, right? Because we have the par line, which the par line can be kind of a class indicator as far as the race shape itself, and then also how fast they're going to go to that first call. So it can also relate to that speed rate. Now, as far as Two Phils, he's the only horse in this entire field that's above the par line. Which in his other races, he's always been above the par line, and that's very good. And as I was saying before we kind of started, I was looking at patterns of horses going back in previous derbies of horses that had also been kind of above the par line in all of their races and then continued to be above the par line in the derby. And it was all horses that ran very well in the derby, even if they didn't win. I think Authentic being one of those. Hot Rod Charlie was one. Epicenter last year was one. A horse that had been above the par line and was positioned above the par line in the derby. So those horses tend to do very well. In terms of form, Two Phils debuted at Churchill Downs, and he didn't win his debut. He finished 5th that day, but he had a lot of trouble. Then moved over to Colonial, where he broke his maiden, won a smaller stakes race at Canterbury. And then off that race, they put him in the Breeders' Futurity, which there was a lot going on that day as far as that was going to be his first race around 2 turns. He was stretching out prior to that. He had only run at 6 furlongs, so he was stretching out to 1 mile and a 16th in that race. First time around 2 turns, and had the far outside post. And also at that point had to kind of improve, right? Forte, some of those other horses had been running faster races. They had the experience, even if it was like a 1-turn mile. So he had a lot going against him in that race. And in terms of the trip, had the type of trip that you're like, I'm not really going to take too much out of this. Let's see what happens going forward. He comes back off the Breeders' Futurity and wins the Street Sense around 2 turns at Churchill Downs. So I know it was a sloppy track that day, but it shouldn't be an issue because he's on a fast track after that. Finishes 2nd in the Lecomte, earns a 93. So his speed figure wise in the Street Sense, he ran a 98, improved in the Lecomte to run a 93. His 3rd place finish in the Risen Star, he improved again, ran a 98. So on that progressive pattern, and then ran that big race in the Jeff Ruby Stakes, recording on Optics figures a 108. So every speed figure this year has been faster and faster and faster, but not like these huge jumps that like freak you out, where you're like, oh, he went from like 80 to 108. Like we could see a bounce or we could see some type of change. He's showing that he's a horse that has that consistency in terms of speed figures and class based on the level. And I think the races out at Fairgrounds, both those stakes races, they were kind of run odd, and they were also run pretty much at night. I don't know if you guys remember watching those races, but there were like, 15, 16 races on the card. By the time we got there, the lights are on and things like that. So I think that that's, something to consider as well, that maybe horses don't necessarily, react to that, or like are running later on in the day. Any type of subtle changes. As far as form, if you haven't seen the work, we debuted the work, his most recent work, so this work leading up to the Derby at Hawthorne, and it's exceptional. It's what you want to see. I mean, he just looks, for a horse like Two Phils, where you're already checking the boxes, where you're proven and graded stakes company, right? So we go back to our handicapping factors. Class, he's fast enough, should get a favorable trip based on the plot. So form, how's he doing after that big race? Is he coming into this race the right way, by the works and the way he's carrying himself at Churchill Downs? To me, like, I know we're only 3 horses into this, but as far as like I'm concerned, when I'm like assessing a horse, like he checks all those boxes.
I read today that
Yeah, I don't think he's flying under anybody's radar right now. He still might not be favored. I think he's still going to be a pretty square price. But as we talk about, he's like very logical. When you kind of go through, depending on whatever you're looking at.
How much do you think the odds can change? I know if somebody puts $1 million on a horse, it's going to change. Do you expect any horses? Sometimes it can be from really,
like, as far as like from like what I would expect their odds to be versus the morning line. Yeah. Like the 12 to 1 morning line. I'd be shocked if it is. It's not. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it does feel like kind of with the buzz that you mentioned and just sort of a lot of the handicappers that I'm following, I think everybody is kind of like using this horse more or less. Now, how that translates, John's probably better at this as far as like how much they're betting to win, how that adjusts there. I don't know, but I think I don't think he'd be shorter than 8. What do you think? You think? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you just figure like Forte's going to obviously be the favorite. So that's your first choice. Tapit Trice is probably going to be the second. So even if he's, the third choice, he's still going to probably be 8-1, right? Stop. No. Of course, I mean, but those are things for us that it's like it's out of our control, right? And we don't know that it might work out. It might work out great. I mean, Mario Gutierrez has won this thing, and watching him out in California, he'll find trouble in a 5-horse field and then he coasts in a 20-horse. It's like I don't know where, Yeah, like. Yeah, so I think the fact that he's ridden the horse and yeah, maybe it does, but I mean, as far as everything else, the things that we're checking off, again, those are things that matters in terms of price. If all of a sudden he's the favorite in the Derby, maybe you start looking elsewhere. But for those factors, does anyone else want to ask a question there? Should we move on? We're good. Confidence game. Kind of a tricky horse to read, right? Because it's one of those horses that's going to come off the layoff. He's been off 2 months. That 70-day layoff coming into this race. A few people liked him from the pool party last out. Yeah, we got it. We got a little root there. Made the case for him, and part of that was really based on his allowance win at Churchill Downs 3-back, where he was on the front end and he was very game. And even though he didn't get a lot of pressure on the front end. When I was watching that race, I was like, that was a big effort. That was a big quality effort. And I was actually concerned that is he the type of horse that needs to be on the lead in order to run his best race. And as far as the race shape in the Rebel, I think it did benefit him that he was able to kind of track off some speed horses and get first run. But coming into the Derbies, you can see as far as optics plot being the 4, right? He's kind of furthest left, we're reading first call left to right and then top to bottom. Would expect confidence game to be on or near the lead. Doesn't have much finishing ability. He is a horse that has some quality. Again, I think the trip could be tough, especially with the layoff. And then because there's a lot of hurdles, right? If it was like, if he checked all the boxes, right? If we were going through all like the same thing with 2 fills, we're like, he's got a good plot. He fits on class. He fits on speed figures. Oh, but the layoff, you'd kind of be able to compensate. But confidence game he's got some other factors that he's has to prove. He would not only have to come off this 70-day layoff and run a good race, he'd have to run the best race of his career. He'd have to get the best trip of his career. And that is probably a couple hurdles. So he is training well. Again, training well when you're training well in general is a lot different going into the Kentucky Derby, doing something new with those other hurdles to overcome. The 5-horse, I know his past 3 running lines are covered up. Yeah.
Would you say, or would you agree with that Disarm was training this horse through a bounce? He would run 28 days after his last effort. There's a good chance that he was going to bounce. Do you think that he trained him through it and been doing some long works in order to combat that?
Yeah, so I think so. I think even if you played this scenario that like you're saying, okay, confidence game is sitting back on his peak effort. If we're looking at his past performances and we're looking at his speed figures, how he ran that 96 in the allowance, he ran a 99 with a pretty much favorable trip to win the Rebel. That was his best race. Is a 99 going to win this race? Seems a little soft. So it's not only that he would have to train this horse like through that bounce, but this horse would now have to be sitting on a race that he's never run before. Yeah. So that's where I struggled earlier in this week because I was like thinking the same thing. I was like, this horse has run well off a layoff. So he can train this horse to get to a peak effort off the layoff. his peak effort, what he's showing me right now, isn't going to win this race. And it's harder to project that through all those factors, he's going to then again run this race that he's never run before and do so off that type of race, going the longest and with a trip where could be a little bit tough. Someone wants to make the case for him at a stab and kind of a wide open. I wouldn't be negative, right? Because obviously you're going to have the price compensation, but essentially that's what it came down to me. It's like, even if this horse is running his best race on the day, I don't know if that's necessarily going to be good enough. Tapit Trice, the 5 horse. Another horse that I know the past 3 running lines aren't there, but you can see on the plot, he's the 5 horse. He's like a big square in the middle. His Gulfstream Park allowance race back on February 4th, that race earned a 101 optics figure and was like an A- optics grade. It was a very strong race, speed figure wise and effort. Now, granted, it was an allowance company. It was a 1-turn mile. Since that race, he has kind of started to improve again. He ran a 91, winning the Tampa Bay Derby, and ran a 98 B+ optics grade, winning the Bluegrass. So he has races. He has races that are fast enough. You can make the case he is a horse that is on the improve in terms of stamina. He has plenty of stamina. I think probably the question with him. This is probably the toughest group that he's ever had to face, right? Because he's an allowance company, running at Tampa. Verifying is the horse that he just barely beat, a horse that not many of us had that much interest in as far as being a contender in this race. So taking on those type of horses is a horse that does have some quirks. He's not that great out of the gate. He can have the tendency to break slow. So that's worth something, like to John's point, being on one of those kind of inside posts where you can kind of get shuffled back early, especially if you break slow. In terms of trip. He has kind of shown, where he looks like in races, the races in Tampa especially, looked like he wasn't going to win that race as the favorite, and he just kind of grinded it out, has that big stride, where it looks like he's just powering through ground, like 2 strides to every one of his rivals, where he could get a share of this race. So he's a tough horse to knock. But with those quirks, even he kind of turns his head a little bit and looks a little bit distracted. He's a horse I'm just not like sold on as a contender for those reasons and the fact that he could be a short price. But he's a horse that is kind of logical enough that it's one I'm going to use. I'm not trying to get out of those other spots and like with kind of my key horses, because he does kind of fit on those other categories. It's just more of, the price with the fact that he can be his own worst enemy. Did you have a question? No, just a stretch? Okay. All right. As far as Tapit Trice, I know there has to be some interest in this horse in this race, no? Yeah? Not anymore? I cold watered him? I said he could run 3rd. He run 2nd. I mean, he would honestly not be any surprise to win, but it's one of those, like, he's another horse that's going to need kind of his best race, best trip, and best behavior. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's always been my concern. My partner at Optics is like, but his stride, and if you look at it, I was like, I get it, but if this isn't swimming where you're like in your own lane and you can just go, if you're stuck behind horses. Yeah. Absolutely. And again, if you're getting the price compensation fees like 20-1, you're like, yeah, we can, mess around, but he's going to be the second choice. Yeah. Yeah. You think so? Seems like the overseas markets are kind of cold, though. I'm gonna jump on that bandwagon, but looking at the overseas markets, I'm like, I don't know, maybe. Kingsbarn is a number 6. That's a horse that, in terms of speed figures, ran his fastest race in that Louisiana Derby where he was able to walk on the lead. It was a race that kind of created trips for every horse behind him. And prior to that, as kind of an individual, he ran a 91 on debut. Then he ran a 98 in his second start. So it was kind of a slow standpoint. I thought he had kind of, just some knocks as far as like class issues. And even considering the fact that this 98 optics figure, it does fit in today's range, a little bit on the lower side, but it was with everything in his own way. Whether that horse has another move forward and is able to show a different dimension, and it seems like that's kind of a tough task for a horse that could get a lot of attention here because people will be looking at those running lines and going, he's 3 for 3. He's Todd Pletcher. He's Jose Ortiz. There you go. Yeah, this horse is really good. He's won 3 straight races. 2 of them he did it very slow, and 1 he did it with everything. He also did it very slow. He needed things to be slow before they could be fast. So, to me, I mean, not a horse that I think is a contender. I mean, in terms of optics plot, he's a horse that does have some positional speed, does have some finishing ability, but again, could be tested with those other horses in the race with confidence game, especially if he's going to be pretty sharp. And then some of those other horses, again, that are to the outside, we'll get to later on. But some of those horses that are on the outside that are just going to have to go, right? Because they got to get position. What's that? He did get yeah, exactly. But he's going to have to, those are Bs again. The Bs are in relation to the company lines, right? So he's running Bs in allowance company, maiden special weight company. Even his B in the grade is in a grade 2 race, compared to being like, who's fast in this race? Who's run fast? Who's run? Nobody. I guess we're gonna have to get down there to 15, but yeah.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, he's gonna have to need another step up. We can kind of see. I'm trying to find one that where like a B and then a step up saw regression, but I'm not seeing that pattern somewhere. Okay, here's kind of one.
Yeah.
But like a B plus. No, that's not quite what I was looking for. Maybe we'll find one as we go.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. Again, there's those are probably the reasons that people will like him is for, there's not much to knock, but he's gonna have to improve in order to win this race. 7 Reincarnate. Another horse that, I mean, initially looking at him, I was like, he's been just extremely average in every race. He won the Sham, which is a race against only a few other horses. Many of those were his stablemates. Pulling off the upset that day, he beat Newgate, which is another, at that time, Bob Baffert horse, National Treasure, and I think the 2 other horses that were in that race, it was only a 5-horse field. One was a turf horse, the other one pulled up. So it's that's his 1B. Oh, this is what I'm looking for. And then he's gone down, going up since that race. He's run B minuses. He's run kind of consistent speed figures. Another horse that is a little bit one-paced. You can see that plotty, has a tendency to break slow, that slog. But again, he's run races that are kind of fast enough, and he's also run every single race in the money. The only thing that really is to like in that case is the fact that somewhere, somebody thinks he's going to be 50-1, which is probably fair odds to win the race, but could he run another 2nd or 3rd or 4th where he's been consistent with consistent speed figures? You say no? I was initially no, but I was saying if you give me 50-1, I will put him in the kind of like the same thing with Hit Show, right? Where it's like he's not a horse that you look at as a contender, but if that number's big enough and he's dismissed enough, I suppose he's usable for underneath.
Want to show.
I mean, I don't really bet to show, but for what you're saying to finish third in like trifectas or supers, yeah, I would use at that number. Especially if for some reason, you know, we start seeing some of the Tim Yak teen runners run well on the undercard or something, you know, things like that. John Velasquez is riding well. But other than that, I think as a contender, I think he's a major reach. I think he's below as a contender in this race. Mage. We're gonna go with Mage. It's another horse that's I think kind of people are interested in because he ran a very fast race on debut, one of the stronger speed figures. He ran that 101 on debut, but again, that was a 7 furlong race. He did regress in graded stakes company, running a 91. You can see he was given the regress keyword. Kind of think he looks like a turf horse. Took some kickback, making a move in the Florida Derby, earned a B, so pretty solid, a B in grade 1 company. But that race overall, outside of Forte, was a pretty weak race just in general. Just kind of going back to that, it was a lot of horses that were stepping up for maiden company or just had run below at the level. So finishing second, tough to really say who's behind you. And it's a lot for a young horse to now kind of come into this spot where another horse that would have to run to a top and then distance and surface might not be his ideal. Were there some people that were interested in Mage at all? Yeah?
I have a question.
Yes.
Do you, I know we're talking horses, but do you ever consider the
You kind of, well, you like Castellano?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, to me, if we're talking about, you asked like my handicapping process earlier. My handicapping process really based on like, is the horse fast enough? Are they in the right form? Can they get the right trip? Are they at the right class level? So those things first, and then because I don't know if I go through that and I say the horse isn't fast enough, the horse isn't going to get the right trip, the horse has been beaten at this level. They're not really showing progression in their form cycle. Oh, this jockey? Oh, wait a minute. This is going to move this horse up 30 points. It's just, you know, it's a lot to ask. Now, what it can signal is intent, right? When they're, especially like at Hawthorne a lot, you know, certain trainers using certain riders can, because move a horse forward like a couple points or move them forward in their form cycle. You know, there is a time and a place that it does make sense with some rider changes, but in that case, if you know you like a rider, it's one of those things that is this horse going to be able to run those same races with that person? Is that rider going to move them up? You know, things like that I consider more than just kind of being like, oh, this jockey's, you know, really good. I'm gonna use him.
So maybe like they're gonna pick Calvin for like a great horse, right?
Maybe 6 years ago, yeah. No, he's been a little cold lately, but yeah, for that reason, right? Because during that time when Calvin was winning, when he had that kind of streak, and then he got on Super Saver, and I think that was after he won the Derby that year. He was on another horse that was like a very impossible long shot. I wish I could remember the horse's name, but they bet the horse.
50 to 1.
It should have been 50. Well, that might have been. There might have been. What's that? No. It was like after. That's when started the trend, right? But then there was like 1 year after that where he had won like 3 derbies in a row, and he was on a horse that was like an impossible long shot, and then it was bet to like 10 to 1 because of the Calvin factor. And then after that, it kind of tinkered away a little bit. Yeah. Skinner, this is a horse that has a lot of buzz surrounding him. He was coming out of the Santa Anita Derby. Well, actually, I'll talk about both those horses since they're side by side. But coming out of the Santa Anita Derby, which was a blanket finish, there was those 3 horses that were together on the wire: Skinner, Practical Move, and then Mandarin Hero, who's currently sitting on the also eligible list. I guess it makes more sense to go Practical Move first because he's the winner. He was the winner of that race. And I think the big thing that stands out with Practical Move, looking at his past 3 running lines, is just how many favorable trips he's had. Had a perfect trip, Tactics Plus, which is pretty much like a perfect trip by the rider's handling. And then I think this is kind of somewhat problematic in some ways. The no line, where it's saying the horse was drifting out late, where that was drifting out late at 9 furlongs, and now he's going to be asked to go 10 furlongs, so there could be some distance limitations there. And then as far as Skinner, I think Skinner's a really good horse. Even going back to the notes that are beyond this, from his debut, it was a better than looked kind of green debut. And then John Sheriffs, who's typically conservative, actually ran him as a maiden in a couple graded stakes races before coming back this year, and Skinner's been on track. But I think he's a very solid horse. Distance-wise, I think that's a big concern. And watching that race, I think where people kind of see him make that move, and it looks like he's going to win the Santa Anita Derby, and then he kind of hangs a little bit. I think that's the distance limitation. More than kind of class or grit or not being fit enough on the day. It's just not having it in terms of stamina, which concerns me for this race, where as an individual, I think that he would fit as well as kind of a lot of these horses where he kind of had some upside. Was anyone interested in Skinner? Yeah? Yeah? What was the case?
The price is going to be right, and I don't think there's a huge difference between him and some of the other ones that are very low.
No, I don't disagree with that. I would say my real one, well, maybe two now that I'm kind of looking at the plot a little bit, but two knocks just being kind of trip and distance for this horse. I don't necessarily think that as far, in the plot, he's quadrant 4. I don't necessarily think of him as a quadrant 4 horse, but if he is in some ways in that trip, that's going to be tough. John, what did you like about him? The jockey? The jockey change is notable.
It is. I don't know why I asked him those, but I think the 2 6 furlong workouts were good. Like he realized stamina to go farther. And then I like Curlin. I mean, he shouldn't have breeding wise. He shouldn't have a problem. And between 9 and 10, the 9 is probably 25 31. The 10 is probably going to be like 10 or 11.
No, I would 100% use the 9 over the 10. The question, I guess the question is where I think as far as his visuals, I have more questions as far as stamina, regardless of what his pedigree is. And then it was interesting because David Aragona said the same thing that I just said right now. That when he watches him, he was like, actually even mentioned the pedigree. It was like, I know people are going to see this pedigree and think, oh, he's going to run all day being Curlin and then whatever the bottom side is. But visually it looks more like there is some distance limitations on Skinner. But I don't disagree. I mean, head to head, I prefer Skinner over Practical Move all day. Of those two. Anyone else? Anyone up to this far? 1 through 10? No? All right. Disarm. This is a tricky horse, at least a tricky horse for me. A horse that when you look at him based on past 3 running lines, based on where he is on the plot, I can't even see him on the plot. Somewhere in there. Yeah. He's under the 22. Actually, his plot's not bad, huh? It's a square, kind of quadrant 3. I guess that plot's not that bad. But looking at the past 3 running lines, he's a horse that's slow. He's below the optics figure range. Grades wise, he's been running a little bit below B minuses, C plus. There's no red, which is a positive. This is a negative. At least there's nothing bad here. And so a horse that based on that should be just kind of a toss, because he's going to have to come into this race and be a horse that we haven't seen before. Now, I kind of made the case that perhaps he is that horse that can step up. And it's a bit of a projection. It is a bit of a move forward. But again, that's kind of where I was coming from on there. Is a horse that had some foundation as as a juvenile. Make sure I'm on the right screen. Had the foundation as a juvenile, had his win, came back this year, came back at Oaklawn Park. Let me just make sure I have these first two races right. Ran first out actually at Churchill Downs. Ran a good speed figure in 80, but he had kickback in that 5.5 furlong sprint, and then broke his maiden impressively. Ran a B plus, or recorded a B plus optics grade and 91 optics figure. And again, that 91 optics figure is as a juvenile in the summer. So you're projecting that horses, as they mature, can run faster as older horses, right? So the fact that he ran a 91 as a juvenile, and what he's run so far isn't much progression from those races. So now we're kind of I'm going to make the case that some of those races he could present a move forward from. So he comes back off the layoff in the allowance race at Oaklawn Park, off the 197-day layoff. Broke slow, saved ground, pretty even second place finish, but ran a 94. Then he runs a 94, pairs up a 94 in the Louisiana Derby. And we've talked about the Louisiana Derby before, how that race shape was run with Kingsbarn kind of setting that moderate pace, going pretty slow. A lot of the horses had trips. So if you're kind of making the case like, Two Phils and some of those other horses that ran well afterwards, that could present a move forward. Now, as far as running in the Lexington, they had to run back on 3 weeks, so maybe had the horse peaked for the Louisiana Derby and kind of had to call that audible, where they needed to just kind of get points that day. And then also as far as Keeneland and Steve Asmussen, that's really not a winning combination. Steve Asmussen doesn't run well. Can anyone else confirm or deny? We see one head shaking. Right. So keeping that in mind, just saying like, okay, well, if none of his barn is running well at Keeneland, and he could still present a move forward from these 94 speed figures, there is a case, especially if he ran a 91 as a juvenile, even projecting 10, points forward off that 91, that would put him at a 101. A 101 would win this race. So he could have that. Now he's training very well. As far as an individual, as good as you'd want to see. Now he does have to transfer that to the racetrack. So again, there's a lot of projection. Rosario will be aboard. Rosario was aboard for the Louisiana Derby and was riding a lot of very live horses for Steve Asmussen at Oaklawn Park. So again, if we're kind of just keying off as far as the rider and as far as intent for the race that they had him the most pointed for, was the Louisiana Derby, and that was the race that Rosario was aboard, and now Rosario is back aboard. That could just signal intent. So eventually I made the case for Disarm as one of those horses that just might not be fast enough. He might be 19, 20 by the time they cross the wire, but he could also be first, I guess, off that scenario. I know that's kind of a weird case, right? But a lot of the times that's when you're making cases for long shots. You kind of have to find maybe something that's not there that you can sort of make that kind of reasonable case for. A little bit tougher in terms of Jace's road, speed figure wise. His fastest race was about what Disarm is running, so not quite as fast, not as much upside, kind of regress. Some class questions as far as drop when he's in graded stakes company. It's a horse that looks pretty below. Probably a horse that's going to be a pace factor, kind of a show early speed and stop where he's on the plot for this left, big circle. So some early speed, but not much finish, not much speed to the second call. So Sun Thunder. I feel like what's that? No, we're good? Okay. So Sun Thunder is another kind of one of those horses that's similar, that I can kind of make the case for, similar to Disarm. His debut race, it's not on there, but his debut race was at Churchill Downs and looked to be a prep sprinting. Gave a big gallop out, projected the horse to stretch out in distance. He did just that in his second start. It was a huge effort at Oaklawn Park back on December 31st, where he had a lot of trouble, made multiple moves, and ended up winning the race by 6 1/4 lengths. They ran him off that race pretty quickly back in the Southwest, And following this horse, he's actually a horse I have a future bet on. That Southwest was not the race they were pointing him to win, but a type of race for McPeak and the way that he trains horses, getting the horse experience coming off a maiden win and pointing him to some other graded stakes races. So the fact that he ran fourth in that race and didn't run like a big speed figure, it didn't bother me that much because I thought he's going to run a big race next out, which he did. He ran a very big race, finishing second in the Risen Star. The horse that won the Risen Star, Angel of Empire, has gone on to win a graded stakes race since. Sun Thunder recorded a 100 speed figure in that race. 100 looks pretty strong compared to these others. The only horse that's like much faster, 2 fills on the synthetic, but he's in line, right? With that race. Now he comes back, Louisiana Derby, we talked about that, how some horses didn't run their best. And then as far as where am I here? Didn't run their best. And then they had to run in the bluegrass in order to get points. And I think that was a tricky spot. I was on I forget whose podcast I was on, but talking about that because they thought that they had enough points, but now we're at a position where we need to earn points, but with the Derby ahead, we can't really empty the tank to win. So you're kind of in this like in between where it's like we just want to do enough to earn points, but not do enough to, put our horse over the top going into the Derby. So really, if we're projecting that this race right here is the only race in his form that he's on that every other pattern. This is the race that he's pointed to where he runs a top. We just need to get points here. Oh, shoot. Didn't work out. We got to run here. He still has this top effort to run back to, and that top effort would make him a contender in the Derby. I know that's kind of next level. Did anyone have interest in Sun Thunder? Thought he was a toss? It's a tricky toss? Yeah. 50-1 in this race. He's a horse I'm using as he'll be on a lot of my multi-race tickets. I don't need a win bet on him because I think I have him at like 90 or something. The 3 is kind of my main A. Angel of Empire, since we're talking about kind of the same thing with Sun Thunder, a horse that's just gotten kind of better with each race. He's been able to pair up triple-digit numbers, which not a lot of these horses have been able to do. But he did so with a favorable trip in the Risen Star, kind of got the right race flow and right ride. And then as far as winning the Arkansas Derby, he got another favorable trip. He was able to take a free run, make that first move. And I thought it was a pretty taxing effort. So I was a little bit concerned that Angel of Empire could be a little bit over the top off those 2 big efforts. I could be wrong, but
You're wrong.
tell me why.
I didn't say it.
I want to hear it. Tell me why I'm wrong. He could be. That's the thing is, I think everybody has this horse peaking at the right time, and I say he ran a hard race and he's gonna back up. Exactly, but yeah, this is kind of a tricky one because off those races, he definitely fits. He's run good races. He's had some favorable trips, but just visually, he looked like he was all out to get that most recent win, and could back up. The other thing is too. I don't have the. Yeah, if you don't, well, eventually. But the other thing that kind of signals that it could be a slightly hard race is prior to that, his other form is he had run with more time between starts. He broke his maiden at Horseshoe, Indianapolis. His second start was back on the 30-day turnaround. He ran a 68. He took a step back. Now, he broke slow, was on the turf, whatever. You can make an excuse. But then he needed 67 days to come back to get a win at Horseshoe, Indianapolis. Then he had another 48 days. Then he had another 48 days. Then he had 42 days. And now he has 35 days. He hasn't really run on that short of a turnaround to be able to show that he can run that top off that type of turnaround. Yeah, I mean, this is the horse that I mean, I'm often wrong. If you follow my work, I'm probably more wrong than I'm right. But a horse that I've seen yeah, I guess I shouldn't say that with my boss in the room, but yeah, there's a lot of handicappers that like this horse a lot. You don't like him? Yeah. Yeah, I don't like it either. I'm negative. Yeah, a lot of handicappers picked him. I think he's going to be kind of one of the favorites in this race. Yeah, bet him down. But again, I mean, he wouldn't be a surprise, but he's kind of one of those horses in here that you got to take a stand on, and I'm taking that stand. All right, who else likes Angel of Empire before we move on? Because we got loves him.
I just like the way he ran last, and he kept going in instructions. He had to do it in early.
That's
I like this race a lot.
yeah. That's what I think. Part of why I think he ran that kind of hard race is that even though he's
Yeah, I just don't know if it was that hard or just that's just how good he was that day.
but he backed up. Even though he won that, he still ran a 101 and he ran a 100. It's not like it's that much of a backup. Yeah. We lost the plot a little bit. Lost the plot. Yeah. 14 is so Angel of Empire. He's sitting in quadrant 2 as a circle, which is basically he's in the same position. He's in the same position as Sun Thunder, more or less, which makes sense. I mean, they ran kind of side by side, but he's covered up by the 15. So perfect segue. Let me see if I can line it up so I don't have him in the crosshairs. Perfect. That's good, right? Okay. All right. So, Forte, I think that regardless of who we like in the race, I think we can all agree this horse is going to be the favorite in the race. He's the most accomplished horse in the race. Accomplished as far as, what he's done on the racetrack. Broke his maiden on debut. His only loss was in the Sanford, which was a second start, going 6 furlongs. And then he's recorded 5 straight wins. Going back to the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, he was just dominant. He just stood out. You can't hear me? Want me to be loud? Do you want me to wait? Let everybody talk amongst themselves? Who are we debating on? Who's the debate? Angel of Empire? All right. 13 and 14? Yeah. I mean...
So they were going to come in like 8 and 9 together, or 4 and 7 together? Versus second? I don't see how they're the same horse.
Yeah.
Off the last 2 races. After, I know you ran against each other, so that's just based on.
Well, I just was saying, like, as far as like where they were on the plot, they both had kind of a similar position in terms of trip. Like there wasn't much. They have like a similar running style. Should be getting a similar trip, and there's not much separation of those two. So if like that was your one data point to look at, here's 6-1, here's 40-1, just in terms of number. If you're looking at,
Based it on the odds.
well, that's the game.
I know that. I'm saying also based on who the better horse is, and I think.
Yeah.
I just think that 14 is much better than 13.
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing as we're gonna say with Forte, right? Is because you're talking about as far as being like a better horse, a horse that's more accomplished. Angel of Empire is accomplished more. He accomplished the win, beating Sun Thunder that day. Both ran good races on that day, and then won the Arkansas Derby. He's more accomplished, where Sun Thunder less accomplished. He didn't win his next starts or pair up speed figures. But on their best day, was there that much between them in the Risen Star as far as trip, right? Where that's right. That's to my point with Sun Thunder is that he hasn't been in the spot based on those races, based on the timing, to show he's been able to progress from that race. Where a horse like Angel of Empire had the timing between starts, had the favorable trip between starts. As far as the Arkansas Derby, that the quality of that race. I mean, the favorite was Reincarnate, a horse that's on the morning line at 50-1 that nobody in this room cares for. Who else was in there? I don't even remember. King Russell, okay, a horse that's a 60-1 shot that's on the also eligible list that was coming off a maiden win. Yeah, so yeah, that's where it gets interesting with these horses at shorter prices, like especially when they're all facing each other in this season. I mean, there's just not much separation. There's just not much separation top to bottom. So we talk about these horses. Angel Empire, he could absolutely be better, but as it sits right now, he's more accomplished. But I don't necessarily know if he's that much better for that number compensation, which is where we're going to run into like with Forte, right? So we're going back to that most accomplished, where he's won all of his races this year, where he was much the best in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. If you go back and watch that race, I mean, just from a visual standpoint, he looked heads and tails above those horses. And he came off the layoff to run in the Fountain of Youth. And kind of the big question at that time for a lot of the handicappers was, is this a horse that's as good as he was as a juvenile, right? Because that's always the question. Where we project these horses can improve. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they peak as juveniles. So I was watching a lot of his workouts down in Florida, how Todd was training, and I've clocked in Saratoga, so I kind of have an idea of like how Todd trains his horses, what they're supposed to look like, and things like that. And it was like Forte's doing everything right. He's checking all the boxes. He's going to run. He's going to come off the bench in the Fountain of Youth, and he's going to run a top effort in that race. He's completely peaked for that race, and he won and recorded a 99 optics figure, which is you're getting a workout today. Where he had run a 97. He had run a 97 in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. He ran a 99, winning the Fountain of Youth, so coming back as a 3-year-old. And then just barely, improved, kind of paired up efforts, winning the Florida Derby. But he hasn't really taken that big step forward. He's kind of running the same races, and knowing just from coming off the layoff and assuming that if he was peaked to run in the Fountain of Youth off the layoff, there's a scenario where we've seen the best Forte, that there isn't necessarily a move forward. So we're looking at a horse like we're talking about Angel of Empire, where have we seen the best Forte? And is that Forte that we've seen that much better than all these other horses? Numbers wise, he's just right on par. His 100 optics figure, again, it's the same as Sun Thunder, finishing second. That's the fastest race he's ever run. Now he has won more. He's more accomplished, but is he that much better, or has the other horses in the crop been able to kind of catch up to him? And I'm kind of that stance where I've seen what Forte has to offer, and I think there's other horses in this field that have now kind of caught up to him, or if they haven't caught up to him, at least they're on the same par, and they are going to offer value. We should go back. In terms of the plot, he doesn't plot bad. I think he plots as like a square in quadrant 2. But when John, my partner at Optics did like some past plots, like where the winners were coming from, and kind of that position where Tapit Trice is on Forte. And if you follow us on Optics, we show the video and you can see that kind of analytics. But that spot is a spot where horses typically finish third. So I'm kind of like, I don't have it pulled up, but yeah, I posted on Twitter and then it's on the video. I'll tag you on it. But it's really interesting to see. A lot of the winners are to the left of the y-axis, mostly in quadrant 1. Most of like kind of the second and third. The second is sort of more like they're on the diagonal, and then the third place runners are like right in the center of the plot as squares. Yeah, but it's like you can really like see those patterns.
Funny because practical move is a spot where like should be big derby contender, but because of the way the Forte is.
Yeah, yeah. Are there any people in this room that are strong on Forte or? Where's Jim? What's? I don't think he's throwing him out. I think he has him in his top. I think he has him in his top 3. I think he had it in the top 3. I never know how picks work. Is because some people are like, "Oh, your picks is like who you think is first, second, and third." I was like, that is way too hard. Who is trying to do that? Especially in here, I think you know. And you were trying to cold deck the trifecta 6 days 6 days out on the website. All right, good good on that. Raise Cain, a horse that just, so we can kind of start to go a little bit quicker through some of these. A horse that's just a little bit too slow, hasn't run a race that's anywhere near to fit Optics figure range. And distance-wise, this will be the biggest test. I guess 17, probably the most interesting horse, Derma Sotogake, coming in from overseas. Speed figure-wise, figure makers, as far as optics and time form, the 2 that I kind of trust and have worked with, have this horse as fast as he needs to be to compete against this field. And then notes-wise, his notes are all positive as far as watching the races. B's a B+. Optics comments say stretch. He can handle added ground. Obviously, that was a sprint. Watching him work in the morning, he gives a positive impression to me. Following him in the morning. A horse that I'm certainly going to use. I think it's kind of the type of race, especially. I'm taking the stance that I think Forte, you know, as the favorite, I want to use some other horses. Derma Sotogake being one of those. Does anyone have questions about?
Correct. Miller is not.
Doesn't have him in the top 3?
Not even in the top 5.
Okay, good. Okay. What's his top 3? Now we have to pull it up again. I know.
Well,
I know he's got 2 fills.
Oddly enough, 2 fills.
Yeah.
All of them caught one. Angel of Empire 2nd, Practical Move 3rd.
Okay, that's right.
Derma Sotogake 4th.
Okay.
Tapit Trice 5th, and then he has Mandarin Hero.
Okay. All right. Cool. Yeah. That makes sense. Okay. Rocket Can. Another horse that just hasn't really progressed number-wise. 97 is kind of his best of the series when winning the Holy Bull. And then has kind of paired up 94 cents, so a little bit softer size number-wise. Another horse they're going to add the blinkers in this race, which is a little bit where they're adding the blinkers on Sun Thunder, and they've got to kind of get them a little bit sharper out of the gate. Rocket Can's had favorable trips, so it seems a little bit experimental. Lord Miles comes out of that blanket finish at Aqueduct, where he had the favorable trip, blanket finish that day. Could make some excuse that those prior 2 races drawing the rail maybe wasn't his ideal. Coming into that race was on some subtle progression, but again, another horse that would need a top. As far as Continuar, number-wise, he's a little bit softer, running B- compared to the B's of Derma Sotogake. And then distance-wise, seems like he could be probably wants shorter when he was running at the 9.5. Mandarin Hero also comes out of that same kind of blanket finish where I thought he ran kind of the better race that day with the BTL. The first horse to draw in off the also eligible list would be Cyclone Mischief, a horse that's been running a little bit below out at Gulfstream Park, below meaning the optics grades below B, so below the winning race for the level. Speed figure-wise is going in the right direction, though, as a positive. A horse that does seem to be improving, and his works are good, but he's still going to have to take a big step forward and would have the outside post should they draw in. I don't think the plot we'll go back to the plot. I know it's getting like a little late. I'm gonna have to like fly through these other stakes races just like with the quickness, but there's the plot again. Any kind of overall Derby thoughts?
What are your, like you did with you, what are your like top five?
So,
You're gonna find a home in your.
yeah, but I mean, Two Pills is going to be a major key for me. I just think he checks every single box. So tickets where I'm using him, like even multi-race, he'll be like some singles on a lot of tickets. And as far as playing exotics, a horse that I'll use like in every single spot with every, with the other horses in there for some combinations. The other horses that I'll kind of be a little bit heavy on, 13 Sun Thunder, 11 Disarm, Derma Sotogake 17. Those are the other horses that I'm interested in. Derma Sotogake, probably, I'll probably be some combination of those based on just kind of the number. Sort of keying around those. And then some of those other prices, some of those other spots, kind of using a few more horses like at prices, but those are going to be pretty much my key horses. Two Fills, A, Disarm, Sun Thunder, Derma. 11, 13, 17, 3.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You guys do the three races, something where Oaks, the Old Forster, Bourbon race, and then the Derby. Have any things you're kind of playing with those?
Yeah, I will definitely. I think they offer those that are good bets. I wrote up all the stakes races. I know I'm gonna just go over them really quick because I know it's getting long and late. It was kind of a gamble saying it was. I got 20 minutes to do 7 races, no problem.
Yeah, we're kind of interested in just like different things.
Yeah.
To play with something to.
I hope that my plan is to try to have some time to ride up those stakes races on Friday, but I'll just see where that time is going to come because now everything gets crazy, like a little bit. So we got live racing tomorrow, and then it's already Friday, so I'm gonna. John, this is a question for you. What's
Just in general, like if we wanted to place a bet for like the big three where it's like the cross between the Oaks, the Forster, and the Derby, like you can do that early.
You can do it Friday.
So you're allowed to go during the Oaks, you don't have to have a reservation at any places. Okay, cool, very cool.
Yep. Okay, I wrote up these stakes races. I'll go kind of backwards, even though I was going to go the other way. I wrote up these races all on the Hawthorne website, so a little bit more details. I'm going to kind of go through quick, and then we can ask about some other races in there. As far as race 11, which is the Turf Classic, so this will be the race right before the Kentucky Derby. As far as the favorite in this race, it's Hong Kong Harry, a horse that's had a lot of favorable trips out in California. He had gait issues in his last race. I'm negative on him. He doesn't really have an edge on the plot. Up to the Mark, which is the 5, a horse that looks very favorable on the plot. He's kind of tough to knock, looks like an improving type, has the good optics plot position, but this is going to be a big step up in class. So with that said, I think he's a horse that's going to take a lot of money in here. Certainly capable. The other horse I'm going to use is the 8, Santon, because most of his better races are over this course in distance here at Churchill Downs. This turf course can be a little bit quirky. This trainer does very well. He's a multiple grade 1 winner over the Churchill course at this 9 furlong distance, and is kind of in the right spot, getting back to the turf from the synthetic. And then the other horse is Masterpiece, which is the number 2 horse, a horse that I thought was actually better at 9 furlongs. He ran in the Pegasus turf at 9 furlongs, was a sneaky good effort in that race. Even though it'll show as a 7th place finish, it was a blanket finish for the minors, earned a 99 optics figure, and now he's coming back out of those longer races where he showed speed last out. I think this horse is very fit. If he's going to run a top effort, this would be the race, so a horse at a bit of a price. So that's 2 and 8 are kind of the keys in there. 10, I gave a little bit of a look to. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. A little bit of a look to, but maybe for next time at Pimlico. So just kind of keep that. I wrote it up on the thing to keep that in mind. The Churchill Downs is a tricky race. Not necessarily. I think this race is number 7. Cody's Wish is probably the horse to beat in here. He's the Breeders' Cup champion. He is coming off the win, but looks just to have a major edge. Obviously has some trip versatility based on the plot. He's either going to be up close to the pace or he's going to close this whole field down. The 5 is another horse in this race that I think is going to be a price. Get Her Number. Cody's Wish, again, I think is the horse to beat, but I think Get Her Number with some buried form on the 5 is one that could be sitting on a top effort, get a little bit overlooked at a price. I'm not sure if White Abario runs in this race, to be perfectly honest. If he does, I hope he lives. The American Turf Grade 2. This race is a pretty tricky race. This is for 3-year-olds. Major Dude, the number 1, is listed as the morning line favorite. He's the horse that finished behind 2 Phils in the stakes last out. He's a very solid horse. He's out as a lot of graded stakes for him. He has speed figures that fit. So as a favorite, I think he's logical, but I think this race is very tough. The 4 is probably going to get a lot of attention here because he comes out of a race that he won impressively at Tampa Bay, and the horse that he beat in that race is the number 8, Mostache. And Mostache came out of that race after finishing behind Talk of the Nation to win the Transylvania. But if you go back and you watch the Transylvania Stakes at Keeneland, the 2 horses coming back from that race that you probably want in terms of trips are 13, and the winner is, and number 14, Web Slinger. Those 2 horses had terrible trips that day, major trouble. Number 8, Mostache, had the front end and the inside. The other horse in here, number 11, Carl Spackler. It's a horse that's coming off 2 straight B+ races, just broke his maiden last out, but very solid speed figures. He was they say his maiden win was with that horse, the 2, Far Bridge. They finished in a very tight photo that day. And then Carl Spackler, the 11, would not let Far Bridge pass him on the gallop out. And Far Bridge came back and won a next level allowance. But I think Carl Spackler might actually be the better of the 2 and could be the better price of the 2 in this race. Again, probably a race that you want to spread, but there's probably some value in here. And then again, I say that the favorite is legitimate. So I'm just kind of as far as the second.
That's 1, 2, 8,
Let me go back. Race 9. No, 1, 11, 13, 14. Race 8 is the Pat Day Mile, Grade 2 Pat Day Mile. I think this is the race that was a little bit tough. Oh, I'm negative. Okay, so the 5 is the favorite in this race. Can everybody? Does that look like a very strong plot? Does that horse look like it has any advantage? I mean, this horse, to me, if this horse is the favorite, I'm gonna fade this horse big time. I think that horse is a very, very weak favorite. 7's the second choice, who looks fine in the plot, but it's kind of negative numbers wise. The 9 looks better on surface distance. I think the 9 General Jim is legitimate. Shug McGahee horse coming off a 30-day break. Then there's a couple horses in here at longer shots that have some upside. 11 Gilmore, who's a kind of quad 3 squares. A horse at that position with this type of plot could get the right trip, and a horse that has some buried form that could be on the improve. 13 is another horse that's kind of tough to plot because of his 2 most recent starts, but his first 2 races fit. His race in the Iroquois is going too long. He wants shorter, and he comes back, and he's on the turf. So if you toss those last 2 races, he fits, and those last 2 races are why his plot position looks like it does. So I kind of ignore the plot position in this case and give him a look because he's also going to be 20-1 in here. Curly Jack, the 10, with a lot of congestion in quadrant 1 and all those EP type runners, could come closing late. Then a couple other horses to just kind of put on the radar. The 6 and the 8 coming out of Oaklawn Park are 2 horses that are going to appreciate the cutback in distance. But I kind of gave a look to, again, I think the 9 is logical. I'm against the 5 across the board. The 9, very logical. 11, 10, 13, and then 6 and 8 will probably be somewhere in there. Just because if the 5 ends up being favored, I want to make sure that I'm not screwing this race up. The race 7, the grade 2 turf sprint. Ravelli has no balls in this race. All right, I will see myself out after that. Has the 1 in this race. Let's start over. Nobody clipped that. Okay. A horse that's fine, but is a big step up in class to run in graded stakes company. It's been a little bit below, as you can see. He's the 1 on the optics plot. The 2 is a horse that's kind of interesting. If you followed any of our Breeders' Cup stuff, I gave the 2 a big look in the Breeders' Cup as an overseas horse. They're pointing the horse towards the Breeders' Cup. Expected him to run a big race, but before the Breeders' Cup, you know, when they're doing like the pre-race, the post-parade, this horse like completely lost his shit. He was like washed out, super fractious. So you can excuse that, and the fact that he's been stateside, he's training with Wesley Ward. John Velasquez has the mount, which that combination, if we're going back to jockeys, has been pretty live over the years. So I think this horse is pretty live, and a horse that has some back class to him as well. So keeping that one on the radar. Horses from off the pace in these 5.5 furlong sprints can close. So we see those kind of horses down in quadrant 4, 2, 3. 3 I would upgrade as well. It's kind of a big price. The 4 is projected to be the favorite. I think that horse is fine, but he's another horse that's going to be stepping up in class off that series of wins. So does have to run the kind of race of his life in this competitive race, but makes sense. And then I think the 9, based on the optics plot, the 9 is a horse at 15-1 that at least I would kind of keep on the radar and in the mix. That horse wouldn't surprise me with that plot. But I kind of looked at those. I looked at those squares from off the pace in this race. Now 11 does have kind of 11 and 10. I think 10's okay. 10's fine. He probably wants a little bit more ground than the 5.5. And the same thing with the 11. I know the 11 looks good on the plot, kind of from the visual, even though the track profile kind of plays more to those off the pace. But he's coming out of those longer sprints at Santa Anita down the hill to run 5.5. So sometimes the plot has a hard time transferring those 2. But that's why he looks favorable, is because those down the hill turf races. The Knicks Go handicap, might as well do it since we're here. Zozo's projects to be the favorite. That's the 6. It's another favorite that looks to me on the weaker side. Is one of those horses that kind of has a lot of hype, is going to get a lot of attention because he has 1s in his running lines and he's Brad Cox. But as an individual, as a horse, he doesn't have any edge in this field at all. He's had favorable trips. The times that he's been in stakes company, he's come up short. So, again, I think the way that he looks on paper sometimes flatters him a little bit more than the way he is as a horse. And there's other ways to go in here. Baby Yoda is kind of the same thing. He's a horse he's run fast races, but not always in stakes company. He's still looking for a stakes win. The 2 overlaps the 3. I think the 2 has a big look in this race. Actually has some form that would fit as far as stakes company. And they're going to cut him back to 1 turn off the layoff, and could be a live move for this horse. So a horse that's at a little bit of a price. The 5 is another horse that's a big price. I know he doesn't look that great on the plot, but he has some back numbers. Same thing with the 8. In terms of the plot, not necessarily great, but coming off the layoff, they're going to cut this horse back in distance to 1 turn. He's working steadily and has some back numbers as far as class and even back numbers off layoffs. He's also coming back as a gelding, which is interesting for like Windstar, who has this horse. Typically, they want to keep horses as complete horses as far as their breeding program. So the fact they're going to bring him off the layoff and as a gelding suggests that they're wanting him as a racehorse and that they're looking towards some things for him, like stakes wise. So I like that horse as well. And then the same thing with a 9, Knee Deep in Snow, a horse that typically is running in shorter distance races. So he has to kind of prove himself at the 8 furlongs. But again, because I'm a little bit negative on Zozos, those are the horses that I'm going to use in this spot. 2, the 4. The 4 is cross-entered at Oaklawn Park, and I think they're going to run in that spot, but I'm not sure. So I'd keep 4 on the radar if they run here, but again, I think they're going to run him at Oaklawn Park. So if you see him, my Oaklawn Park picks, that's 4. Okay. Some long shots in there. Let's see. I think we're only 2 more. Okay. The Distaff Turf Mile. So Spinderella, the 5, is going to be a big favorite in here. She's coming off a layoff. She's very talented. But in terms of the plot, looks like she's going to have some contention in Quadrant 1. Doesn't have much finish. Now, she might just be the best, but she's going to have to overcome the track profile. Track profile does kind of favor horses from off the pace, so it upgrades the 2. Speak of the Devil, a horse that's run a very big race over the Churchill Downs course, and the 7. But I actually prefer the 2. They scratched the 2 out of, I forget that stakes race at Keeneland, but the race that in Italian won Gate to Wire, Speak of the Devil was in that race, and they're going to run here, wait for this race at Churchill Downs instead. So there could be some intent. Excuse me, we're not ready to go yet. So I think the 5 is good, but I think there might be a scenario where those 2 Chad Brown horses in this type of spot might be able to get her. Okay, this race, there's only 6 horses in this field. A big favorite in Goodnight Olive, who's very solid. She looks very solid on the plot. Can certainly win this race. I kind of spent a little bit of time on this race because it's like I could make a case for every single horse in here except for maybe the 6. So I wanted to kind of like make a strong decision, and I ended up landing on who did I land on? I landed on the 5, Matarea, and I just think her form cycle pattern is very positive. She's in the 2nd start off the layoff where she's coming out of the same common race with the 3 Wicked Halo, where I think Wicked Halo was meant to win that race out at Oaklawn Park, where she earned the B+. That was a 6 furlong race. The extended comment on Matarea suggests that she might have needed that race coming back off the layoff and might need more ground, all of which she's getting here, and has enough tactical speed that maybe she gets a jump on the 2 and is just in form. Speed figure wise, she's run as fast as Goodnight Olive. They both run 103s. So in kind of a compact field, I wanted to have a concise pick. So that's where I went. I'll probably end up as the 3rd choice in this race. I think that's value on a horse that's probably pretty live. All right, so I know I went through quick, but I wrote up those races. I wrote up the entire full card on Saturday. So even the early races and even the races after the Derby. Yes. Yeah, betting. Yeah. Yeah, they're on there. All right. Does anyone have it? It should be in the... Yeah.
You don't expect a lot of people to bet show for the Derby?
Oh no, a lot of people will. I just meant like personally for me, it's not a bet that I personally do, but yeah, it's a big bet for sure.
But most days, hardly anybody bets show anymore.
But in the Derby, yeah, Derby would probably be a fine time. Yeah. And you can look at the pools and you can see if there's some like overlays.
Oaks is at 4:51 on Friday.
Well, 4:51 our time? Okay, that's not bad. All right, any other questions? No?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, sorry we didn't do it. Thank you. Frosty, they're clapping for you.
Thanks for your patience.
I gotta get a picture of you and then.
Okay.
It's not on yet. He made me turn it off because he was going.
Okay. We can wait.
Older brother.